and trying to fix the broken, shattered environment. But at the same time, there's a price to pay.
We sat in a corner table. We talked about what it meant to be part of a family with a serious addict, to be a parent, to be a sibling, to be the addict.
And he said, "Sir," as he would characteristically say to his friend, "Sir, I think this would make
a little almost like he didn't want to fully be there."
Steven Spielberg and Rob Reiner, two absolute giants of modern cinema, each blazing his own lane, yet bound by one shared obsession: storytelling. Spielberg built entire worlds that pulled you in and refused to let go, while Reiner perfected sharp, emotional stories layered with humor that hit you right in the chest. Different styles, different flavors, but the same deep respect for the craft. Over the years, their paths crossed constantly at Hollywood events. They'd swap stories, trade ideas, laugh about old projects, like two veterans who didn't need to explain themselves to each other. Their bond wasn't staged or industry fake. It came from real creative admiration. Then suddenly, everything shifted. Out of nowhere, shocking rumors about Rob Reiner started spreading fast. Hollywood froze. And for Spielberg, the impact was immediate and crushing. The whispers moved quicker than the facts, and the fear of losing someone he truly cared about hit him like a punch to the chest. What made it worse was how recent the memories still were. Not long before the chaos, Spielberg remembered standing at a party with Rob, who couldn't stop smiling while talking about his son, Nick. Rob spoke proudly about how Nick had battled addiction and finally found his way back home. That joy wasn't performative. It was written all over Rob's face. The two filmmakers stood there talking about big dreams, future projects, and stories that still needed to be told. Then, boom. Exaggerated reports exploded online, twisting everything into something unrecognizable. The emotional weight hit before the truth even surfaced. It became a brutal reminder of how fast lies spread when people crave drama. Thankfully, the rumors turned out to be false, but the damage had already been done. For Spielberg, it felt like stepping into a nightmare no director would ever want to experience in real life. When Spielberg later spoke about the situation, the emotion was impossible to miss. This wasn't his polished public persona. This was raw. He said, "Rob wasn't just a colleague. He was a friend, a companion on this wild cinematic ride I'll always cherish." His voice stayed low, but every word carried decades of shared memories. You could see it in his eyes: frustration, sadness, nostalgia, all colliding at once. Spielberg reflected on the early days when he and Rob were just two dreamers trying to survive Hollywood. "I remember Rob back then," he said, "so full of ideas, but always humble when he spoke. It wasn't just fear he was processing. It was the realization of how fragile everything can feel, even for legends." And in that moment, Spielberg wasn't speaking as an icon. He was speaking as a friend who had just been reminded how fast everything can change. His hands tightened as he spoke, like he was gripping those memories for dear life. That mutual respect between Steven Spielberg and Rob Reiner never faded, not once. And when Spielberg began listing the films that turned Rob into a legend, the emotion in his voice was impossible to miss. This wasn't Hollywood talk. This was real feeling. "He made people laugh, cry, and think," Spielberg said. "Filmmaking isn't just art, it's connection." Every word landed heavy. You could feel the respect pouring straight out of him. To Spielberg, Rob wasn't just the creative force behind The Princess Bride. When Harry Met Sally or Stand By Me, he was the man who turned laughter into meaning and friendship into something timeless. As Spielberg's voice softened, the weight of legacy hit hard. This wasn't just admiration. It was love mixed with loss. Rob Reiner left behind a catalog of films that will live forever. No debate about that. But for Spielberg, watching his friends struggle behind the scenes was something that never really left him. When the news finally broke, Spielberg publicly reached out to the Reiner family with words straight from the heart. He wrote, "I am deeply saddened by Rob and Michelle's passing." It wasn't about headlines or attention. It was compassion, plain and simple. He called Rob a wonderful friend, an extraordinary colleague, and a gifted storyteller, making it crystal clear just how deep that bond ran. Then came a rare moment of vulnerability. Spielberg shared a memory he almost never talks about, one that revealed the quieter, heavier side of their friendship. It happened years earlier at a relaxed Hollywood get-together. Music playing, people laughing, old stories bouncing around the room. But in the middle of all that energy, Spielberg noticed something felt off. Rob was standing away from the crowd, drink in hand, looking drained, distant, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. Spielberg walked over and gently said, "It's been a long time. You don't look okay. What's going on?" Rob paused, took a deep breath, then motioned for Spielberg to step out onto the balcony, away from the noise. That's when everything got real. Rob opened up and admitted his son Nick was struggling deeply. The fear in his voice hit hard. This wasn't polished or guarded, it was raw. Spielberg later recalled how carefully Rob spoke. He didn't point fingers, he didn't blame anyone. He was just being honest. He talked about how addiction had shaken their family and how the emotional weight was tearing him up inside. In that quiet moment, away from the lights and laughter, Spielberg wasn't standing next to a Hollywood legend. He was standing next to a father who was scared and hurting, trying to hold it together. Rob admitted he felt torn, pulled apart trying to be both a father and a protector, yet sometimes feeling completely powerless. It was a moment Spielberg said he would never forget. You could hear the pain in every word Steven shared about that night. Rob tried to smile, tried to act like everything was fine, but the weight behind his eyes told the real story. Then, finally, Rob let the silence break. "Steven, Nick's been struggling with addiction for years," he confessed. "We've tried everything, treatment, structure, support, you name it, but somehow, relapse keeps pulling him back." His voice dropped low, his eyes fixed on the night sky, carrying a kind of pain only a parent could truly understand. Spielberg later said that moment burned itself into his memory, the night Rob Reiner finally let the mask fall. Rob admitted he'd poured his heart into being Charlie, hoping the film might help his son heal, or at least bring the family a little closer together. And for a while, it did work. Rob's voice tightened as he said, "He stayed clean for some time, but now it feels like we're right back in the storm again." Every word carried fear. And then came the confession that shattered Spielberg completely. "I'm terrified, Steven," Rob said quietly. "I wake up scared that one day I might lose him forever." The honesty in his voice was haunting. Spielberg leaned in, speaking softly but firmly. "Rob, you've done everything a father possibly could. Nick is lucky to have you and Michelle fighting by his side." But Rob slowly shook his head, eyes glassy, voice cracking under the pressure. "Sometimes," he said, "we listen too much to doctors, and not enough to our son. I just want to save him, but the harder I try, the more helpless I feel." His words hung in the air like a wound that refused to close. The two men sat there in silence, sipping wine, staring out into the darkness as laughter drifted faintly from inside the house. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Some moments don't require words. That conversation stayed with Spielberg for years, etched deep into his heart. Time passed, life moved forward, but the memory never faded. Then, in October 2025, fate placed them face to face once again, this time at the Governor's Awards, hosted by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in Los Angeles. The moment carried an unspoken weight, years of friendship, shared success, quiet heartbreak, and the deep understanding of two men who had lived through both glory and grief. The room was glowing with Hollywood royalty, bright lights, sharp suits, stories from the golden age bouncing from table to table. As Steven Spielberg walked in, scanning the crowd, his eyes suddenly locked onto Rob Reiner across the room, and everything else faded out. There he was, laughing loud, grinning wide, surrounded by friends. The sight hit Spielberg so hard he froze for a split second before heading straight toward him. When they met, the two hugged tight, patting each other on the back like brothers who had survived the same storm and somehow made it through. "Rob, you look great," Spielberg said, his voice filled with genuine surprise. "How have you been?" Rob's face lit up instantly. His eyes shined with an energy Spielberg hadn't seen in years. "Steven, you won't believe this," Rob said, practically glowing. "Nick's home. He's doing so much better. He's been clean for months now, working small jobs, talking with us again. It finally feels like before." A rush of warmth hit Spielberg's chest. In that instant, every late-night conversation came rushing back. Every cracked voice, every fear-filled confession, every moment Rob carried the weight of loving his son too much and being terrified of losing him. Spielberg squeezed Rob's shoulder with a proud smile. "That's incredible," he said. "You and Michelle never gave up. After all this time, hope is finally back." And this time, it felt real, not rehearsed, not wishful, just real joy after years of heartbreak. The two drifted off to the side, talking about new projects, fresh talent, and the kind of stories that keep Hollywood dreaming. But even as they talked shop, Spielberg couldn't stop noticing Rob's smile. There was something different about it, a quiet glow that only comes after surviving long nights of uncertainty. Looking back later, Spielberg said his voice dropped when he remembered that night. Who could have imagined, he thought, that just months later, everything would change? He still remembers the jolt, the shock that tore through him when he read the news about the tragedy surrounding Rob Reiner's family. All that hope, that spark that had just begun to shine again, gone in what felt like a single heartbeat. Spielberg sat quietly by a window, staring into the distance, his mind replaying that night. The laughter, the flashing lights, the warmth of friendship. He could still hear his own words echoing in his head. "Rob, I'm happy for you. Hold on to hope." And he could still see Rob's soft smile in response, a moment frozen in time, reminding him just how fragile hope can be, and how deeply it can hurt when it's taken away. Spielberg still remembered Rob's eyes that night, glowing with gratitude as he nodded back quietly. Only later did Spielberg truly understand just how fragile that hope was, and how fast life can twist without warning. The days that followed felt unbearably heavy, flooded with headlines and heartbreak that hit Hollywood like a punch to the chest. Trying to process it all, Spielberg did something deeply personal. He sat down and rewatched The Princess Bride, one of the films that captured Rob's magic like nothing else. As the movie played, he smiled through tears, and when that unforgettable line, "As you wish," echoed through the room, Spielberg whispered softly, "Rob, you lived fully, and your work will never fade." His voice caught, but the feeling behind it was pure and real. When Spielberg later released his public statement, it was filled with grace and restraint. No speculation, no drama, just peace, respect, and gratitude. He reminded the world that Rob's creative spirit, his humor, his warmth, and his humanity could never be taken away. In that moment, Hollywood felt dimmer, like a piece of its soul had gone missing, but the films remained bright, alive, and timeless. Truth be told, Spielberg and Reiner weren't the kind of friends who talked every week or showed up unannounced at each other's homes. But inside the film world, their connection ran deep. It was built on something stronger than casual friendship, unshakable mutual respect. Both men shared a belief that storytelling is a human force, shaped by cultural roots and homes where curiosity, art, and big questions were part of everyday life. Rob Reiner leaned into grounded, human-centered stories, friendship, love, fear, and that quiet war inside the soul. Spielberg, on the other hand, chased scale and wonder with emotional punch, building worlds that felt massive yet personal, like you were walking right through them. Different lanes, same mission, no ego, just respect. They crossed paths at award shows, seminars, and industry events, always greeting each other with genuine admiration. Reiner once said Spielberg's blend of emotion and imagery was something every director could learn from. Spielberg sent the respect right back, praising Reiner's rare gift for tapping straight into everyday humanity. That kind of praise, soft-spoken, sincere, and direct, is the highest respect one filmmaker can give another. And it naturally turns the lens back toward Spielberg himself. What kind of director is he really? How does he use light, sound, and framing to create stories that don't just hit your eyes, but lock into your memory like they were always there waiting to be remembered? Steven Allen Spielberg was born on December 18, 1946, in Cincinnati, Ohio. The eldest child, the only son, growing up with three younger sisters in a household buzzing with ideas and emotion. His roots ran deep in Eastern European Jewish culture, and the dinner table was never quiet for long. His father, Arnold Spielberg, was a brilliant electrical engineer working on massive early-era computers, the kind that filled entire rooms. Logic, precision, and structure were always in the air. Then there was his mother, Leah, a gifted pianist who filled the house with music, warmth, and creative fire. She made emotions feel safe, loud, and alive. That contrast, logic versus imagination, structure versus feeling, didn't just shape Steven's childhood, it shaped one of the most powerful storytelling minds cinema has ever seen. No hype needed. The Spielberg home was loving, but never fully settled. Just when young Steven started feeling comfortable, the boxes would come out again. Time to move. New streets, new schools, new faces. Because of his father's job, the family was always on the move, and Steven was constantly starting over from scratch. "I remember every move," Spielberg later said. "Each time I felt like I lost a piece of myself." That ache hit deep, but instead of breaking him, it sharpened him. The constant change taught him how to observe people closely, read a room fast, and blend in quietly until he found his footing. Those instincts didn't come from comfort. They came from uncertainty, from never knowing what tomorrow would look like. Then came the moment that changed everything. At just 6 years old, his parents took him to see The Greatest Show on Earth, directed by Cecil B. DeMille. When the lights dimmed and the circus exploded onto the screen, Steven sat frozen, eyes wide, heart racing, completely locked in. And when the movie ended, he grabbed his mother's hand and whispered, "I want to make things that scare people and make them feel joy like that." Leah smiled, brushed his hair back, and said gently, "Then you must first learn how to tell stories, my dear Stevie." That single moment stayed with him forever. It lit a fuse that would define his entire life. By age 12, everything clicked into place. Spielberg's father handed him an 8mm camera, and boom, his world flipped upside down. He started filming everything: family trips, backyard adventures, even toy train crashes he staged just to capture chaos on film. He'd boss his sisters around like a tiny director saying, "You play the victims, I'll save everyone." Those shaky home movies weren't just playtime. They were his way of wrestling with fear, of taking confusion and turning it into something controlled, something beautiful, something that made sense. Behind that little camera lens, Steven Spielberg wasn't just filming. He was learning how to turn chaos into story. And that instinct would change movies forever. Life wasn't always gentle with Steven Spielberg, not even close. When his family finally settled in Phoenix, Arizona in 1957, he quickly realized he was one of the only Jewish kids around, and that difference made him stand out in ways that hurt. The world felt loud, fast, and unforgiving, and even as a child, Steven learned he needed armor. For him, that armor became creativity, and storytelling became his voice. Years later, Spielberg spoke openly about those early scars. He talked about being bullied, shoved around, called names, and carrying that quiet shame that comes from feeling like you don't belong anywhere. "I always wondered why I was different," he admitted. Instead of swinging back, he turned inward. He watched people closely, studied emotions, collected details like survival tools, choosing observation over chaos. That pain didn't crush him. It sharpened him. It built the deep empathy that would later pulse through his films. That's why his stories feel so human, so alive, so real. They come from someone who felt everything deeply. By just 13 years old, Steven had already started transforming pain into purpose. He made his first war film, Escape to Nowhere, a 40-minute project that stunned people by winning a local youth competition. By 16, he went even bigger, pouring every dollar he had into Firelight, a 2-hour science fiction adventure he wrote, directed, shot, and edited himself. That movie only screened once, for a small hometown audience. But to Steven, it felt like the premiere of a lifetime. When the lights came up, he looked around that tiny theater and whispered to himself, "One day, People will line up to watch my films. And he meant it. But beneath the ambition and imagination, there was pain he kept locked away. One moment in particular followed him like a shadow. When Steven was 16, during what was supposed to be a peaceful family camping trip, everything quietly changed. He was filming near the campfire, camera rolling, doing what he always did, capturing memories. Then, by accident, he filmed something that made his heart stop. His mother, Leah, holding hands with Bernie Adler, his father's closest friend. The shock hit like lightning. Steven froze. He shut off the camera, and he never said a word. He buried that moment for nearly 3 years, carrying it silently, like a secret too heavy to touch. That silence, that betrayal, that emotional fracture would later echo through his storytelling in ways no one could fully understand at the time. Because behind Spielberg's magic, wonder, and hope, there was also a boy who learned very young how to carry pain quietly and turn it into something unforgettable. When Steven Spielberg's parents divorced in 1965, his father Arnold took the blame publicly, all of it. He shielded Leah from criticism, protecting what little dignity the family still had left. Steven had already moved to California with his dad and didn't understand the full truth back then. But that silence, that buried pain, would echo through his life for decades. In a flash of anger and confusion, young Steven turned on his father. He looked Arnold straight in the eye and said coldly, "Dad destroyed this family." Arnold didn't argue. No defense, no explanation, just a quiet nod and silence. That moment cut deeper than any words ever could. That silence stayed with Steven. It didn't fade. It simmered. For more than 15 years, he kept his emotional distance, blaming his father for every crack in their family. That buried conflict, mixed with guilt, loneliness, and regret, became emotional fuel that shaped Spielberg's entire view of humanity. You can feel it in his films, the tension between love and resentment, distance and forgiveness, broken families trying to reconnect. It's the same emotional current that later surged through The Fabelmans, where Spielberg finally faced his own memories head-on, truth wrapped in art, pain softened by storytelling. By the late 1960s, Spielberg's talent was impossible to ignore. In 1968, his short film Amblin premiered at a festival and left Universal Studios executives stunned. It was polished, emotional, professional far beyond his age. Right then, Steven knew this wasn't a hobby anymore. This was his life. He dropped out of college and jumped into Hollywood with everything he had. At Universal, he started as an unpaid intern, sneaking into empty offices late at night to practice directing. He edited projects on the studio's dime, learning the system from the inside out. That kind of hunger doesn't stay invisible for long. By 1969, at just 22 years old, Spielberg made history. He signed a long-term directing deal with Universal, becoming the youngest filmmaker ever to do it. Hollywood had officially opened the door. He began in television, directing episodes of Night Gallery and Columbo, sharpening his craft one shot at a time. Then, in 1971, everything changed. His TV movie Duel, a tense story about a man hunted by a faceless truck driver, had audiences glued to their screens. Critics called it electric, fresh, and terrifyingly real. That success kicked the door wide open for his first theatrical feature, The Sugarland Express. But the true explosion came in 1975 with Jaws. The shark thriller didn't just scare audiences, it rewired Hollywood itself. Pulling in over $470 million worldwide, Jaws created something entirely new, the summer blockbuster. Studios never looked at movies the same way again. Spielberg later admitted the shoot was brutal. Mechanical sharks constantly broke down. Ocean storms destroyed sets. Crew members were pushed to the edge. But out of that chaos came cinematic history, fear, suspense, and a director who turned adversity into legend. Steven Spielberg wasn't just making movies anymore. He was reshaping the industry. And every triumph, every scar, every silent wound from his past had led him right there, proving that sometimes the deepest pain becomes the greatest creative power. But that chaos forged the legend we now call the king of modern cinema. Spielberg later joked, There were days I thought the shark would finish me off before the movie did. And honestly, it almost did. But Jaws didn't just survive. It exploded. The film turned Spielberg into a global force overnight and rewired the entire movie industry in one brutal splash. Yet what came next proved Spielberg was never just about suspense and spectacle. Behind the camera was a heart that understood laughter, tears, and belief. With Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Spielberg revealed his emotional core, the child inside him who never stopped believing in wonder. These weren't just movies, they were emotional lifelines. Stories packed with hope, loneliness, and longing that reached straight into people's souls. Audiences didn't just watch them, they felt them. Then came the shift, and it hit hard. Spielberg turned his lens toward humanity's darkest chapters. Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan struck like emotional lightning bolts. They forced audiences to confront morality, war, sacrifice, and truth in ways few directors ever dared. These films weren't entertainment, they were reckoning. By 1994, Spielberg co-founded DreamWorks, a studio that would go on to dominate nearly every genre imaginable. Animation, drama, action, history, and even decades later, his fire never faded. Films like Lincoln and Bridge of Spies prove something powerful. True creative greatness doesn't burn out, it evolves. Away from the spotlight, Spielberg kept his personal life guarded. In 1985, he married actress Amy Irving, and that same year, they welcomed their son, Max Samuel. The marriage didn't last. They divorced in 1989, but the respect between them never cracked. Amy later said, "We did what was best for Max, and they lived by that promise without hesitation." Not long after, life introduced Spielberg to a new chapter, Kate Capshaw, the actress he directed in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Their connection began professionally, but there was something undeniable beneath the surface. Spielberg later admitted, "I watched Kate's audition tape and just knew she was right for the role." Kate joked years later, "I never imagined that a part filled with screaming and chaos would lead me to the man of my life." Filming took them from Sri Lanka to the United States, and amid the explosions, heat, and exhausting shoot days, quiet dinners and deep conversations slowly built something real. At the time, Spielberg was still married, and both he and Kate kept everything strictly professional and respectful. Still, those late-night talks between takes planted the first sparks of a bond that neither could ignore forever. What began as collaboration quietly transformed into one of Hollywood's most enduring love stories. Proof that sometimes, even in chaos, life is setting up something far bigger than anyone expects. It wasn't until 1989, after his divorce, that Steven Spielberg and Kate Capshaw finally made things official. They began dating openly and soon moved in together. The real start of what would become one of Hollywood's most solid and enduring love stories. Kate later explained it simply, "We grew close on set, but we knew we had to wait for the right moment for anything real." That patience, that mutual respect, set the tone for everything that followed. Before they even walked down the aisle, Kate made a deeply personal decision that spoke volumes. She chose to convert to Judaism, embracing the faith that meant so much to Steven and his family. It wasn't performative or rushed. It was thoughtful, sincere, and rooted in love. In 1991, they married in both a civil ceremony and an Orthodox Jewish ceremony, blending tradition, belief, and raw emotion into one unforgettable moment. Spielberg later shared that marrying Kate helped him reconnect with his Jewish roots in a way he hadn't felt since childhood. It grounded him, centered him. Their love didn't just build a marriage, it built a family that Hollywood couldn't help but admire. Kate brought her daughter Jessica from a previous marriage, and Steven had his son Max from his marriage to Amy Irving. Together, they opened their home and their hearts, welcoming both biological and adopted children. What followed was one of the most famous and tight-knit families in the industry. More than 30 years later, their marriage is still standing strong, something rare in show business, where love stories often burn fast and fade faster. Kate gradually stepped back from acting to focus on raising their children and pursuing her passion for painting, while Spielberg kept delivering films at the highest level. Their family eventually grew to 7 children, all now adults, each carving their own path. Some stepped into entertainment, others chose completely different worlds. In 2020, one of Spielberg's daughters made headlines after publicly sharing personal career decisions, emphasizing they were entirely her own and fully supported by her family. That moment said everything about how Spielberg parents: support without control, love without pressure. Through every challenge and every spotlight moment, Spielberg has stayed consistent. He leads with respect, patience, and the belief that family always comes first. His role as a father has never been about dominance or control. It's been about guidance, safety, and trust. And that care extends beyond his own family. Spielberg has long been known as a steady mentor to young actors just starting out. One of the most touching examples was his bond with Drew Barrymore during E.T. the Extraterrestrial. She needed stability, and Spielberg showed up. He once said being there for her wasn't just responsibility, it was meaningful. That quiet compassion, that instinct to protect, reveals exactly who he is behind the camera. Someone who values people first, fame second. Even now, at 79 years old, Steven Spielberg is still going strong. He's developing new projects, revisiting classic franchises, and chasing the same spark of curiosity that first lit up his world when he was just a kid holding an 8mm camera. As he once said, "I've never felt tired of storytelling." And judging by his journey, that spark isn't fading anytime soon. He once said it with a calm, almost knowing smile. Every film is a new chance to say something honest. And that right there is the secret. Steven Spielberg never stopped feeling, never shut the door on emotion, curiosity, or wonder, even after decades at the very top. In recent years, he's shifted toward balance and wellness, keeping both his body and mind sharp enough to move at the speed of modern filmmaking. Those close to him say his creativity hasn't slowed down one bit. If anything, it's sharper. Fueled not by stress, pressure, or ego, but by discipline, curiosity, and purpose. That's the difference between chasing success and understanding it. After everything, the triumphs, the heartbreak, the friendships, the losses, and the rebirths, Spielberg summed up his entire philosophy with one powerful reminder. Awards fade, fame fades, but people are the story. That single line says it all. It's the truth that's lived inside every frame he's ever shot, every world he's built, and every heart his films have touched. If this story moved you, let's talk about it. Drop a comment below and tell us which Steven Spielberg or Rob Reiner film changed your life. Like this video if stories like this hit you where it matters. Share it with someone who loves film, storytelling, or Hollywood history. And subscribe for more emotionally charged deep dives, untold stories, and powerful legacies that don't fade when the credits roll. Because the greatest stories never really end.